is Eric Johnson. I'd like to welcome you to my Hot Licks instruction video. And to begin with, I'd like to go ahead and try to tune up to your guitars and everything. So I'm going to give you an E first to start off with. It's the E first. It's a B second. A fifth, and finally the E sixth. I want to start off by kind of describing what I'd like to talk about in this lesson, which one of the main things I'd like to talk about are my major influences which helped me build my style, and those were Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Wes Montgomery, Cherry Reid, Chet Atkins, and a few others. I'd like to stick mainly with those. It was their inherent styles that I used to form an amalgamation of my own style. And I'd like to demonstrate through certain techniques that I took from my favorite players to form that amalgamation. And some of the particular techniques I'd like to discuss with you are picking, both with the pick and without the pick fingering. And the fingering on the left hand or the right hand if you're a left-hand player. And chords and my own kind of chord theory, the way I approach lead, and then a couple of extra techniques which I use to embellish the style, which is vibrato techniques and the use of harmonics and the different ways you can use them. And finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about a general equipment layout that I use that helps me achieve the sounds that I'm going for. So to begin with, I'd just like to preface this discussion a little bit about the influence thing. And it's like there were a lot of players that were key players in my life that really helped inspire me to play guitar, and they kind of molded my style. And so the way I went about it, and I suggest this, is to pick out guitar parts off of records of your favorite players. You can slow the recordings down and try to maybe get it note for note. And I used to do this a lot with like Venture records when I first started playing, and also with the Cream records. I would sit around, you know, do something like doing stuff like that it helped me see and understand the theory and the architecture of where the playing was coming from. And it was good for me to do this because it was a catalyst to form my own thing. And I think that it's fine to mimic somebody else as a starting point in your playing, because understanding someone else's style can help you design where you want to go with your own style through, you know, this bit from this player, this bit from another, and you can form your own amalgamation, your own style from this. So you know, I think once you you know, learn, you know, some guitar chords or leads from players, and then, you know, maybe begin to record yourself, and you can use like a cheap cassette player or whatever. You can work on building your style through hearing your own recorded guitar. You can form a value judgment of what you wish to improve or enhance or embellish in your own playing. When you listen to playback of yourself, it's good to be very discriminating, and I like to, when I do that is I pay attention to, you know, there's like 4 things I pay attention to. Is mainly the clean technique, the note choice, the melodical content, and just the general overall feel of what I'm doing. So I'd like to get in to start talking about technique. I'd like to start with right-hand technique if you're a right-hand player, or the other way around if you're a left-hand player. There's 2 categories to me. There's picking and then fingering. So first I'd like to talk about pick technique. I use a small pick. It's about half the size of a normal pickup. It's a pickup. No, the pickups are okay, but it's it's like twice as thick as a regular pick. So it has a very positive connection with the string. And I like to have smooth edges on it, so when there isn't a lot of extra unwanted pick noise, which is kind of a personal preference for me. I use a very soft hold with it. I don't hold it real hard, but I try to get a powerful connection with the string so that the power comes from the actual contact, the pick with the string. One technique that's very essential to me playing with a pick is what I call the bounce technique. It's where actually it improves the tone, I think. It's achieved by the correct up and down strokes. Rather than playing side by side, it's a question of you're actually going from the pick guard up, so you're brushing the string. The idea of the bounce comes in when you're playing fast. And the idea is just to keep that, you got to keep the wrists loose to get that. It's a little harder to work on. I usually use that to warm up with, really to, to keep that very agile. Another technique I'd like to talk about with picking is what's called the circle picking technique, which is where the thumb joint actually extends and contracts to create a circle type of picking around the string. And the point of that is for playing a lot of faster stuff where you don't want to move the hand a lot, like precisely if you could see close, if I played it slow for you. Is moving back and forth on the string. And that's also a very useful type of picking thing to do. You can also adjust the tonality of how you want it to sound via the place where you pick. If you pick I'm picking nearer the bridge or the first pickup, or I can pick near the neck to get a warmer tone. And it can be done on either pickup. Orchestrate your picking in the place that you want to for the kind of tonality you want. One thing that's of note is you can either pick the notes or, of course, do pull-offs. You can either have it where you pick every note, or you can do the same thing pulling off. The idea, I think, is good to practice both because, again, there's a difference of tonality in whichever way you do it. If it's straight picking, or if it's pull-offs. There's two ways that you can design your picking according to the sound you want. A lot of times on lead, pull-off will give a little smoother kind of tone than depending on what you want. And it's really good, to, as I was saying, to practice both. I'd like to talk a little bit about the pick technique with chords. Of course, there's the regular strumming. You strum backwards. And there also can be an articulate picking technique, which I call, where it's more like where you're picking every note individually. Nice for articulation of parts, like on kind of thing, where you want to speak the voice of the note more rather than the strumming. I'd like to talk a bit about muting at this point. Both hands use muting technique. For right now, I'd like to address the picking hand muting technique. The idea of the muting is for either the side of the palm or the inside of the palm, side of the hand rather, or the inside of the palm, to be at any and every place that you're not playing, so that wherever you're not playing, you're muting. Otherwise, especially at high volumes, you'll get a lot of noise and unwanted feedback and whatever. So the way that I do this mainly is when I'm just playing regular notes, I'll use, like if I go, I'm using the palm of my hand where I'm not playing. If you can see that. So I'll try this a little slower, maybe you can watch. Especially the bass strings, you can see this coming into play, whereas when I'm playing treble strings, it's more of the side of the hand coming into play. And then the bottom string, I'm muting the E and the A when I hold the D string. I'll keep it a lot cleaner. So there's also the finger muting, which we'll get into in a little bit. For picking technique, that's pretty much the main parameters I use. So I'd like to venture into talking about finger technique, which is I do without the pick. And it's for a warmer sound usually. There's two different styles I use. There's one I call the piano style, which is where I attack all the notes at once. It's more like where you're just hitting all the notes. There's a little bit of punch. And then the other style I use is the articulate style, where the notes, as I was saying earlier, with the pick, but just without the pick. Incorporated into your lead playing, where you use your pick. Use your fingers, It's a different sound to use that. So mainly, of course, the classical way or bass guitar way is more like this, but I use more of like where I was just kind of clawing the strings as if I had a finger pick, but without it. So it's more like just. And you can do it with a little bit more of a punch to it, like it's kind of nice for a variancy on country style. That's where you're hitting it a little harder and then you mute it. You can go down with the thumb and up with the fingers. So we'd like to talk about one other fingering technique with the right hand, not using a pick, non-pick technique, if you will. This is kind of the Wes Montgomery thing where you use the thumb, which is probably the warmest sound of all. You're actually taking the thumb and you're brushing it down on the strings. And it sounds best with the neck pickup. And you just kind of try to get the flesh of the thumb. It's not so much of a nail thing, so it's more like... See that, it's just... And that's a technique I like to use a lot. I use that in a song called East West that's coming out on our new record. Of course, use it for chords too, which I'd like to get into a little bit. Now there's a technique that I like to use the most, which is pick-finger combination. And I'd also like to reiterate the bounce technique where you to really get that sound, because that's part of it. And using the pick and the fingers, you can get more of a kind of thing like... where I'm actually bouncing the strings and I'm using my fingers as well as pick. Most of the kind of technique I use with my right hand, and sometimes I'll even use that in lead. So you could see where I'm actually... It really affords me the flexibility to just keep the pick, and sometimes if I want all fingers, I can just do this with the pick, with the first finger. So it's just to quickly go over what we were talking about. There's the indication of with the pick and finger is the regular strum. It's a piano style. And there's the articulate style that I use. And there's lead with pick and fingers, you know. Discussing a little bit before. I'd like to now go into fingering, and it's my personal discovery for myself that your hands as well as your shoulders should be very relaxed because this helps you get your tone. And one thing that I know I do, which I try to become aware not to do, which I think is very important, is to breathe normally, because there's a tendency when you're going for certain licks to hold your breath, which actually it can play havoc with your tempo as well as just the flow of your playing. And there's a thing that I like to do called precise finger placement on the string, and to me that's very important. It's a little bit of a ambiguous rap to talk about it. It's basically you, through a process of trial and error, you learn to feel where the connection with the string is right, because a lot of your tone actually will come out of the way your fingering hand will hit the fret. It's like if I just, try to get the right part of the finger to have connection with the string for the best tone. It'll also give you a little cleaner playing because you're more on top of the string. There are 3 exceptions that I use to this. Of course, the flattening of the fingers if you have to play chords. And I use a thing called curved flattening of the fingers, where you actually curve part of the finger to achieve chords within a structure such as this. Just flattening part of the finger for the E, A, and D note of the A, D, and G string. The joint comes up to allow the other strings to be open. The way around if I wanted an open string. So that's a nice thing to kind of work on. You can do it with the different hands too, or the fingers rather. The last exception I have to the rule of precise fingering placement is if you wanted to actually finger 2 notes on 2 different strings with 1 finger. For example, you would fret right in between the 2 strings. Doing here, I'm like for the B and E string, I'm playing an E and an A with the 2nd finger, and then on the A and D string with my 3rd finger, I'm playing the 2 strings with the 2 notes of E and A too. In very handy on certain chords. For instance, if I was to play this chord, major 7 chord, but I wanted a bottom on it, I might bring my thumb around and actually my thumb would play 2 notes. So I could get away with a few more voicings in the chords. Also, sometimes, for instance, on Soulful Terrain where I went, to me, there's a little bit of a different sound using 1 finger for 2 strings. I'm using 2 fingers for 4 notes. It sounds a little bit different than, it's a little bit more of a punchier sound, so you can incorporate that sometimes when it isn't absolutely necessary, just for a different sound. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about the thumb behind the neck, which I think is pretty important to do. Because it facilitates your chord reach. And if you get in a habit of doing that with chord reaches, you'll find yourself available to move into other chord spacings that maybe you wouldn't think of, such as... Let's repeat those to show you. There's my thumb sticking out. Of course, there's some exceptions to that, especially when you don't know what you're doing, but anyhow, also keeping your thumb behind the neck will help you achieve a more precise fingering to do lead passages as well. Like I like to keep my thumb behind it, so for like. affords me the chance to spread my fingers out a little bit more. And then again, there are two exceptions I use for doing that. As mentioned earlier, like that D major 7 chord, if I need that for the thumb over to get those notes, then I like to do that. Or if I wanted to put like that chord I was showing you where I use a finger for 2 notes, if I wanted to get a bottom on there, I have to bring my thumb over for that. Or if a lot of different chords, if I want to really stretch it. Doing like what would that be, like a flat 5 B flat chord with a major 7, but I wanted to put a bottom on it. Or if, there's a real pretty West chord. Put a 5 in there, I'd have to use my thumb. So sometimes there's always exceptions to the rule, but the point is that it is a good guideline to just help facilitate your playing, unless there's an exception to the situation. Also, the Hendrix type rhythm, he used his thumb a lot, and it got a kind of a different tone. Using the thumb for the bass freed you up to do all sorts of stuff on the top with the rhythm. So it's nice in that respect too. Of course, you can also go, if you want to do that, and get the, because that's really not very good technique, but it looks cool, and that's what counts. So, as mentioned earlier, the left hand also aids in the muting process. And again, it's a situation where you want to mute unwanted noise and extraneous notes from coming out of what you're playing. So when you first hit a string, we were talking earlier about the muting of the side of the right palm and the side of the right hand and the palm. But when you first hit a string, such as first hit that note, right hand isn't in a position to effectively and immediately mute the strings that aren't wanted. So that's where the left hand comes into play to help in the muting process. And the particular technique I like to use is, as I'm using the tip of my fretting finger, the idea on the neck is to let the sides of the fingers touch the strings adjacently to keep them quiet while you're hitting the other string and the other notes. So if I was to take this real slow, you could see, like if I was going to go, take that real slow with the B, the tip is muting the E string, the under portion mutes the D fourth string. Same kind of situation for the little finger on the D string. When I hit that G note, I'm muting on either side of it too, via the under part of the little finger and the tip. If I was to stop the note there and give a vibrato, that would give me time to do the rest of the muting with the right hand. So it would be starting with the left and ending with the right, muting that is. To play right there. Further add, just regressing a bit to the right hand, also another technique of muting with the right hand is another finger muting as you do with the left hand, where if you're stretching strings, if you're on the G3rd, you're stretching up. I usually use my fingers to quieten the B and E string. And I'll use this part of the hand to quieten the other ones. If I was to stretch on the B string, I would use one of the fingers to just get the E first only. It's right here is where you can see that I'm muting that. So it's kind of a two-part process, finger and palm on the right. And as long as I'm doing the licks, I'm muting with the sides of the fingers. If you're playing faster runs and you want it legato sustain, legato sustain, more the mute, is going to come from that whole process of with the left hand. And the tips to mute where you don't want to be. If you were to want to play faster runs and have muted style throughout the run, of course, then you'd want to use the side of the hand where you mute constantly. See, the right hand is muting constantly there. So the legato technique is a little bit more difficult because everywhere you do finger, trying to get the right tone with the finger, you also have to be cognizant of the adjacent strings to hit in an appropriate space to where you're deadening them. So that pretty much covers the gamut of the muting process. It takes a little bit of practice, and once you do learn it, it's something you have to kind of keep up so you can feel the right kind of space to keep that muting together. As far as fingering of scales and runs, I don't really use any certain method. It's pretty much trial and error as to what I want to what kind of run I want to do. Of course, if I need to do a wide stretch, I want to position my fingers accordingly. Otherwise, you can just get away without using the little finger, but it's good to always incorporate the little finger into runs. One of the main things that dictates the kind of fingering I'll use is actually the kind of sound I want to do. For instance, a big string will have a certain sound. The smaller strings will have a different sound. Play the same note on different strings. It's good to practice your scales or runs or what you're trying to play on different strings because it'll change what kind of sound you want to get. I could play the same thing. I could yet even thicken it up more. So depending on the kind of sound I want, it might dictate the kind of finger. Change the way you want to do your fingering. That's kind of what I use as far as fingering. And again, it's kind of just a practice thing of, well, that works better there, and I need to, if I have a wide scale, I need to keep my thumb behind the neck, then, well, I need to, get the little finger out there to get the scales I want to get. So the small strings give you a tighter, punchier sound, and the bigger strings will give you, the thicker, throatier kind of tone. And you can, as I say, you can play all the different, notes on different strings. So going forward now, I'd like to talk a bit about chords and the way I look at them. I'd like to preface that with the fact that the guitar is a bit hard to tune up. So to talk briefly about tuning, I think I use what is called a three-point tuning process, where I'll actually use 3 ways to tune the guitar, and this is to enable a better tuning of the intonation of the chords as well as the lead. And those ways are the conventional. Use the 4th fret below the open string that you want to tune, except of course for the G, the 5th fret, except for the G, which is the 4th fret, with the B to the B. And then also it's harmonic to harmonic, the same note though. Also the 3rd way I do it is where it's octave harmonics. a harmonic and a note. Harmonic at the 12th fret of the bottom string you're trying to tune up to the top string, and on the 7th fret you fret the note. So I would hit the 12th fret of the D, and I would do the 7th fret of the G to get the corresponding note on the G 3rd string. And that way, if I would go through checking a tuning, temper the whole guitar. So that is just to preface talking about chords, so that when we do go chords, we can get them in tune more. The way I look at chord theory is not so much a theoretical approach as to me, you can look at it in a more simple way. And the way I look at it is kind of like they're a combined group of notes that are individually either a recessive or a dominant melody within the whole of the chord that you're playing. And it's through these chord changes, as you change in a song, there becomes an inner melody of the notes in the chord that has maybe movement of different, whether it's simple or complex, but it's a movement of that inner melody that develops as the chord changes occur. To show an example, I'd like to just start with a simple thing. Like if I was to just do like a major chord to a B minor chord, I'd go to an A chord with a C sharp, which would be a 3rd bottom, D chord. If I wanted to elaborate on that, maybe I want to put a 2nd in on the A, so I bring it up here. The 2nd on the B minor. Might want to drop the root on the octave of the A chord to a 7, and then maybe a major 7 here, 6 in it. Basically what I'm doing is just alternating certain notes. So if I was to have a melody like, tell a story with each passing melody that you might put in a chord. I could take just a simple a chord like a D major 7. Change it to, put a 6 in it. And I can change the whole effect of it. Now I might want to put a 3rd on the top instead. Now I could take that same chord, say that I got to that point. You know, it's just it's a process of these simple little steps that you can see the changes in the elaboration of the chord instead of seeing it as all one big thing that's kind of hard to reach to. So again, I like to say I start with a D major chord, change it into a major 7. Maybe I want to drop the 3rd to a 2nd. Now I want to put a 6 in. Maybe I want to put a 4th on the top. Now maybe I want to add another string, but I've run out of notes. So I'll just transpose that to the next place. Guitar, which will be like this. At that point, I can put a top of a 6th. I could put a major 7. I could even put a 9. So it's through that simple changing that you can tell a story with the chord changes. And the application and the desired effect, you can. It kind of depends on the kind of. If you want a kind of an open kind of chord sound, which is more for kind of a power sound, like. using mainly the 1 and the 5. Like if I'm in E, I'll use an E, a B, an E, a B, and you stack those fifths. And as you do that, you want to, like say, oh, I got this string here that would be a third, but I want to mute it. So it's the muting process we discussed earlier. This, like if I wanted to get a real powerful, so I mute the third with the side of the third finger on the on the D string that's fretting an E. So it's like, if I was to actually play individual string, it would sound like. If I was doing an A, I'm muting the third. Hear that within the context of playing the chord. And then there's also the more defined chords where you do bring in the seconds, the thirds, the sixths, the flat fives, and that's where you get more of the, it's telling more of the story of the chord instead of leaving it more open and simple. I'd like to quickly regress and talk about the different styles of my major influences and the kind of chords they used and the chord techniques that they used. To start off with, I'd like to talk a bit about Jimi Hendrix and his rhythm effect, which he's one of my favorite rhythm players. He used a lot of the neck pickup, and to me it seems that his roots with a lot of rhythm stuff, it's definitely the blues, but it was also kind of a Motown feel where he'd take a lot of fourths and fifths and slide around and do chords with 2 or 3 notes instead of just playing the whole note. For instance, he might go like, evident in a lot of his songs. And what's happening here is just, it's an old kind of Motown thing where they just, if I was in the key of A, this stuff. Articulation and elaboration on the actual chords. In other words, if I have an A major chord, I'm going to put a little feel in it by starting at the second and then go to that third. Let's go. Instead of going and that's the way he approached it. And of course, he would do it with more of a thing like Axis, where it got a little bit more depicted. More spacey version like the Electric Leyland. So it's a process of playing chords sometimes with kind of an inner lead thing happening, 2 or 3 notes. Also like to talk a little bit about Wes Montgomery's chord technique, which is more with the thumb and just playing more of a kind of a just, the more defined chords with the thumb. Sound, just using the thumb very simply and brushing across the chords. You can intermingle them too. Different styles, take one thing you like from the other. Another person that has very nice chord style, which really influenced me, was Chet Atkins, and he attributes a lot of his chord effect or his whole general technique to Merle Travis, which is basically where you keep the bass and chords going at the same time. It's done like with a bass thing. If you had like a use the side of the hand to mute the bass, and then leave the top strings open. A7 to D7 to G7 to C. A7, D7 to G7, C. And if I put that with the bass, side of the hand, I'd come up with something like this. And that's a very interesting technique to use with country stuff, of course. And then you can kind of put a melody with it as well. So it's a process of keeping a bass going, basically 1, 5, 1, 5, and then putting the top in that you want to do. And it's good to just practice them individually and then put them together and do it very slow and build it up, and you can work into that the bass chord kind of thing happening. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Jerry Reed's style. To me, there's a bit of an interesting similarity between Jerry Reed's rhythm and Hendrix's, and not in style in as much as technique. Again, with the Hendrix, you a couple of notes to define a rhythm. Jerry Reed also did that too, like with, say for instance, with Red Hot Picker, where see that real slow, it's using 1 and 2 and 3 notes sometimes to do the rhythm. See the interplay, and it's also the bounce with the piano technique of hitting a lot of stuff at the same time. And the muting comes into play, especially with the bass, because that the dynamics, namely accents, are what really can set your playing off from just a normal lead passage. So if I was to just do like, or if I was to do it with more accents, put a little bit more feel in it. Also, you get the more inflection and feel and nuances you put to it, the more interesting you make it. Like if I was to go, first off I could go, or I could put those accents in with it. Take it one step farther and put a little nuance and a little feel to it, like, and just put a little color with it, but just by the way you might stretch to the note, or just a different, kind of put a little sass to it or whatever, like. This will add a little effect to it. So the inflection and the feel will basically accomplish two things with your playing. It'll give it character and it'll give it originality, because the type of inflection and feel you're going to think of, the nuances, are going to be really something of your own for the most part, or an amalgamation of players that you like. So moving ahead, I'd like to talk about influences and their my favorite players, how they affected me with the way they played lead. One of the earliest people was Eric Clapton with the Cream, where he would really dig into the string, like. If we could just check the pick is where it digs into the string. Kind of, it's a version of that kind of bounce technique where you get more of the throaty sound because you're digging into the string. It was a very influential style on me, the Clapton effect. Seemed to me that he would really try to get that kind of singing, big, woody tone out of it by brushing into the string, and he would use the bridge pickup and kind of roll all that tone off through a Marshall, and you get kind of that thick tone. One of the things about Clapton's playing which really taught me a lot was his use of vibrato with the left hand, and he had what I would deem as subtle vibrato, just to barely rock the string with your wrist, which would be more like. Where you just barely give a little bit of vibrato on whichever string you're on. Again, adding character to the notes you're playing, and then he used a more verbose vibrato where he would stretch the string and give it more of a like a. And that kind of technique could be evident on his song Spoonful, where he would like. Actually using the fulcrum of the hand behind the neck, stretching up to the note, and then just rocking it back and forth to the note and back to where you originally stretched from. favorite player of mine, who was Jeff Beck, and the thing that was so wonderful, that's so wonderful about Beck is his use of semitones, and he actually plays purposely kind of a bit out of tune in a very definitive way. I mean, he does it purposely where he just kind of... Actually, he would stretch the note a little bit out. Interesting way to give a little tension to what you're playing as well as the originality of Beck starting that. He would end on, instead of ending on roots or even thirds, he'd end on like fourths in strange places, like if he was, instead of just playing like, go like a, sort of, and kind of leave it in suspension a bit. Jeff Beck is also one of the first players that really brought to the forefront the guitar approach of kind of trying to match like the pitch wheel of a synthesizer, where you're actually stretching up to notes. In other words, like... stretching as if it was like a wheel to an absolute pitch. In slower explanation of that would be like... I'd also like to talk about Jimi Hendrix, because he was a very influential player to me, and he came a lot from the blues thing with his lead playing, and he would, more stuff like... kind of idiom, or stuff like Red House, where he would use a lot of the neck pickup to get that kind of sound. And of course he used a lot of like fuzz, which I like to use, like the fuzz face, to get that kind of a sound like he got, which is more of a psychedelic kind of thing. It was a very significant part of what I learned, because he could go through so many different sounds and so many different tones, and he had all these little characteristics to his playing, like where he would bend two strings like... influential on my lead playing was Chet, because he would put the lead with the rhythm, and get more of like what we were talking about earlier with the bass and the chords going, and then he puts kind of a melody within that and comes up with kind of a whole song within itself. So that was interesting to me to learn, because I love the sound of it, and also it kind of could encompass so much in one guitar part. For example, a little song thing I do, which is a direct thing that I got from Chet Atkins, is like. And the idea with that is to keep the bass going, have the chords. There's also a melody within it where it's basically part of the top chords, but it's being accentuated as a different melody. Idea of Chet Atkins, but just with accentuating a lead melody on the top via the second and third fingers. Another big influence on me for lead was listening to steel guitarists, because they always are working on that bounce technique that we were talking about earlier, and a lot of piano type picking technique, and something that I kind of call absolute string stretching, where you actually stretch right to the note. Like steel players, as if you had a pedal, so you get more of a. You can actually stretch before you even pick the note to give you even more effect of the pedal, like. So I'd like to show both examples real quick. The first, where you just pick and then stretch, is like, so if I was going from a C sharp, like if I was an A, and I might stretch the C sharp to a D and stretch the E to an F sharp, but I'd go right to it as if it was a pedal, like. The other way is where you actually stretch the note first and then pick it. So relatively the same lick doing that way would be more like. Kind of a steel technique with that, and to do something like that in combination with the bounce technique, you can get kind of the country kind of stuff. So if we could get that bounce thing with the piano technique of hitting certain notes together at the same time. Idea is to approach it as if you had pedals. So the steel guitar technique on guitar can pretty much be accomplished by using three factors. the piano type picking where you're and keeping the bounce in mind, keeping that, the right hand going up and down, along with the absolute string stretching. And the absolute string stretching is something that you can just practice, and according to the gauge of strings you have, you can feel kind of where the spot is, where it matches with the note you're trying to get to. One of the last people I'd like to talk about is a lead influence on me was Wes Montgomery. And as we were talking earlier, he used the thumb to brush across the strings to get that real warm kind of tone. And he basically would just, for the song body, he played melodies via octaves, and he would get something like. It was a combination of the two notes with that luscious tone that we get. Usually, of course, with a Gibson, was more warmer tone. But the idea of it is to, when you're playing the octave, is to, there's a middle string in between the octaves. So the underneath the first finger that's playing the lower note will mute that inner string, and then the first under the third finger that's playing the higher note will mute the other strings. And if necessary, the curvature of the first finger will come around and mute the top strings that aren't being played at all. When you go into the D and B strings, it's usually necessary to substitute the third finger for the little finger. So you can stay with the first and third up to there. Play take it all at once, it's a little difficult to do the architecture of the chord, but you can get roughly the same thing. Another type is, of course, is the classical style of harmonics, which I use with a pick. So it's another technique of harmonics is the Lenny Bro technique, as I call it, which is where you do harp harmonics of putting the guitar basically into a chromatic harp technique. And this can be done roughly due to the tuning of a guitar open. You can take and play skipping strings in between and starting with a higher note and then going to a lower note. But the idea is to pick the first note, chime the second note. So if you start with a high note and you have a lower note, but you pick the first note and then you chime the low note, what you are doing is bringing it to be chromatically right above the higher note. For instance, just to make the guitar in an open tuning chromatic to describe what I'm talking about, I would take the D and then I would chime the second note, which would be the E, and I could bring it chromatic with the D, then do the G, and then the G right here, then the A, then the B, then the D, harmonic on the D, open E, and then an open G, harmonic. And this is what I would end up with. It's using the classical harp harmonic technique with the right hand. And now the idea is to take the same technique and put it with chords. This also can be elaborated upon by pulling certain notes off. Like if I was to go, I could go. And I could get it more. To get that kind of effect. Also can be two notes done at once with the same chord. Like I could go, or I could go, where I'm actually using my thumb and first finger to make the harmonic, and at the same time using my third finger to just hit open a note that's a string over. So it would be like if I was to take the G and A string first, harmonicking the A string, and then the B and D string, harmonicking only the D string. And then the open E with the G string and harmonicking only the G. And so that kind of adds most of the light to the way I use harmonics. One other way I use them is I'll put them with chord playing. If I was to... You can add more voicings to chords by actually using the classical technique, pinging a harmonic at whichever note you'd want to bring out. That effect. Lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about my amplifier setup in light of what I go for to try to get the sounds. I like to use two Fender amps for the kind of clean rhythm sound, and just set them kind of lower for the real kind of clean strat sound. And then I use another amp that's a dumble amplifier. Actually, it's just like a very high-powered twin. It's for getting more of a dirtier rhythm sound. So have certain fuzzes on that to you know, get different kinds of lead tones. Go to a third amp set up for more of a straight ahead Marshall kind of sound. Sometimes it quits because the switches are so bad and all. Through all these different effects and amp setups that I'll go anywhere from clean to a distorted, depending on the kind of style I wanted to use. So I really want to thank you for sharing this video with me, and I wish you all the luck and success, and I hope that your music brings a lot of happiness into your life. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.